This is learning and in Psych 101. We're talking about learning. In our first session, we talked about classical conditioning, operant conditioning. We're still talking about those types of conditioning. Now we've gotten to the point of, for operant conditioning, particularly with regard to reinforcement, to talk about applied elements of it. So I'll tell you, you might wonder, because I've been preaching, use reinforcement. It makes you powerful, helps you get things done, helps you control to some extent your environment and how other people behave. So I've been preaching it. Do I practice it? Do I practice what I preach? In the behavior modification unit I teach, I do my best to reinforce. It's complex when you have 150 students or so. So I reinforce students for speaking up either on Moodle or on, I haven't seen anything on Moodle about learning yet, but maybe I will see some things, or I'll contribute myself. Speaking up in class or on Moodle, either way. Attending class when we have class sessions. I write, so just send them an email, say thanks for your contribution, or I noticed you've attended every class session, something like that. Earning HDs, some of the easier assignments, there's so many people I don't write to them individually, but I commend all of the high scores in a posting in Moodle. And then people get a perfect score, I might send them an individual, I did recently send them an individual email. That's pretty good to get a perfect score on something where you're 5 out of 120 or so who manage that. I also like to commend students for helping each other. I'm not aware of that usually, but sometimes I see it on Moodle. I've had years where someone will ask a question and before I can answer it, another student will answer it. I'm like, well, that's pretty good, especially if it was the correct answer. That's doing my job for me. I appreciate that. So I try to acknowledge that. You might say expressing gratitude, but I'm also giving them information or feedback. This is good, which is from my perspective. That's what I'm saying. This is good. Keep doing that. I don't tell them keep doing it, but that's in the message of reinforcement. Now, succeeded, all my students do a behavior change project, and we don't grade on that, on whether they succeed or not, because I want students to tell us the truth. But sometimes years later, I'll see them and say in 4th year, and they'll be at some meeting, a research meeting, and they'll say to me, oh, I took your class, and as an external student who I didn't recognize, I took your class, and I'll always say, what did you do for your project? And the last time this happened, the student said, well, I worked on my own nail biting. And I said, how'd it come out? She said, very well. I said, well, show me the nails. And she did. They were good. They looked good to me. So I commended her for that. That's the long-term change we're hoping for in those behavior change projects that I hope will go on forever. So I commended her for that, and there are a whole bunch of people around. That's sometimes the most powerful reinforcement in front of others. Not only does it have an effect on that person, but it tells the others, this is something good to do. Maybe that's something for me to do too, whether it's get a high score or help others in class or whatever it is. And then the other thing we do in there with regard to reinforcement, or one other thing, is students all create a video. And most of them put it up on YouTube where it competes against billions of other videos. But anyway, it's there telling individuals, here's how to do something. Here's how to get over a phobia of heights. Or here's how to help your child sleep in his own bed by the time he's 3 or 4. It's something like that. It's behavior modification principles applied and how to do it. So I commend them for good videos, and I ask my markers to tell me what are the good videos. And then I go look at the videos on YouTube, and I put a little comment there. I enter my name and say, good content, something like that. And then I tell other students, you might want to watch this one. This is useful content. So I'm shilling for them, I'm promoting for them, and all that amounts to reinforcement in a way. So I do practice what I preach when I teach. That all rhymes. But it isn't just there also with regard to reinforcement. I was talking to my hair cutter who I've been going to for years, and it just dawned on me after years, boy, she's a brilliant conversationalist. And I said that to her, boy, you're a good conversationalist. you could be, she knew I was a psychologist, and I said, you could be a psychotherapist. And she says, I am. That's part of what I do with people. And I said, well, what's your secret to that? And she said, I listen. And I thought, that's pretty good. That's just what I teach in behavior modification, and then when I teach a counseling class at a higher level, to listen is good, to pay attention. So in a way, I was reinforcing her, and I wanted to reinforce her. I wanted her to keep doing that, keep being charming, and then I realized keep listening too. Although I'm mostly interested in her stories. She hears a lot and she experiences a lot. All right, so that's the microphone I just hit. That's a microphone. That's just some examples of reinforcement. I hope you will use reinforcement in your life. Now, I mentioned we'd get to punishment. That's another part of operant conditioning. And it's the dark end. If it's true punishment, it really does change the behavior. And so that's what we want to do in, say, behavior modification. We want to change the behavior, but there are side effects here, just like for taking a pill. When you're taking a medication, even that nice pain pill that I mentioned to you, seems like such a great thing. Well, you take a lot of those and they may destroy your liver, depending on what drug it is, or they may cause you ulcers if it's a different sort of drug. And yeah, there are risks from medications, without a doubt. Well, there are risks. There aren't so many risks for reinforcement. There are just tiny ones. But there are significant risks for punishment, particularly when you go into the positive punishment realm, and particularly when you're doing it the way parents do it, which is not how we'd ever teach. We never suggest spanking kids. It's very hard to get parents to stop doing that, but we never suggest they do that. That's not part of behavior modification the way we teach it. Wouldn't be ethical. And so you might wonder, why are psychologists so hepped up against physical punishment, smacking kids? And so I've listed here some reasons that there's this classically conditioned fear. Remember classical conditioning? Now the saying of wait till your dad gets home, and dad's going to get the belt out and whoop your rear good, that makes dad the conditioned punisher. And what happens from that parenting, it may just happen from one trial again, one experience, or it may be several experiences with dad inflicting physical punishment. Dad, once you see dad, whenever you see dad, even if he isn't going to get out the belt, you start to have that fear reaction in you. That's classically conditioned. The CS was dad, who was positive or neutral, but then you pair him a few times or many times with causing pain to you. Pain is very important to human beings. And he may then be part of this CS now. UCS is the getting hit and feeling that pain. The pain is the unconditioned response. Getting hit is the unconditioned stimulus. But what do you see first is you see dad. And you may see a look on his face or something like that. That's a classically conditioned fear. There's also a risk of aggression in response to this aversive stimuli. And the aggression, you may not turn it against dad. You may turn it against somebody who's littler than you, because it's not safe to turn against dad or against mom, because they're big people. And the reason you got to think about this, how many of you were spanked when you were little? About half. Yeah, I wrote a newspaper column about this. The rate's going down in Australia and most other developed countries. The percentage of parents who do that is going down and down and down year after year. But it's still a substantial percentage of people. And one of the things I say about this is when your spanking usually stops, especially if you're a male child, about the time you meet eye to eye with dad. When you're as big as dad, you probably have better muscles because dads are starting to atrophy from age. And there's no more spanking them because you could deliver a licking. And I think about that for my son, who I now look up to, and he has muscles on his muscles. The chance of me spanking him now, he's an adult, Not good. Would not turn out well for me. Although he's a nonviolent person, he'd probably just walk away. But it would be quite risky for me. There's the problem of model aggression. What is the model a child might get when you smack a child for doing something wrong? The child did something wrong. Everybody agrees with that. And you smack that child. What's the model the child is seeing? What are you modeling as a parent?
Is it how it could happen to them?
I'm going to give you the microphone again. You are our leader. You got to flip it on there.
That since it's happened to them as a kid, they're going to redo it to like their kids?
They may do it to their own kids. That's right. That's a good bet because nobody teaches parenting very much. We just copy what our parents did. We do that mindlessly. That's modeling. We're going to get to that. That's one of our next learning topics is modeling. But something can happen much sooner. The message the child may get from that model is, you can get your way. You can force people to do what you want if you're bigger than them and you use violence, if you hurt them. So you wonder where bullies come from at school, who are pounding the smaller kids or the more bashful kids. They're probably getting it at home. Not always, but the odds are relatively good. So there's this modeled aggression there, which is not what parents want to do. They don't want their kid to be the bully. No. And you're going to bully again. You got to have this power differential. You're going to bully people who you think you can get away with it. The smaller kids or the more meek kids. So there's a problem of model aggression. And then there's the problem of avoidance. You want to make your kid into a little liar? Use physical punishment. Do it just to get out of the punishment for a day, for an hour. They'll lie and make up fantastic things. It's a route. There are other routes to being a little liar or a big liar. But that escaping from it, the avoidance attempts. So these are just some of the reasons we're against it. And we try to preach something different. I show here one of the classic paintings of all time, Edvard Munch and The Scream. I think this painting was stolen and gone for a long time, but now it's back. And it's one of the classics. And that's sort of what it's like when you're getting physically punished. So if you ever try to convince parents to stop doing this, they're going to say something like this to you. Well, what do I do when Johnny runs into the street? I got to hit him, don't I? He's going to get killed. And if you don't have an answer for that, your goose is cooked. As a psychotherapist for the family, you need to have an answer for that. So I'll tell you my answer and the sort of typical psychologist answer. Here, because you got to give people an alternative. You can't just tell them, don't do what you've been doing for years, because that's all they know. That's their habit. You got to give them something that's better in some sense. It's either more adaptive, or looks better, works better, something that's better. It's nice if all of those are better. So what do you do when Johnny runs into the street? Because he's playing with the ball or it bounced into the street, so he runs out and gets it. And little kids will run right between two parked cars where no driver coming by can possibly see them because they're the height of the front of the car. They're going to run out there and they're going to get killed. That's certainly the risk. That's the parent's fear. So what's the alternative to smacking that little guy and tell him, no, I told you a million times not to go out there? Well, I'm going to step off this. I don't know if the camera will get me, but you get down on Johnny's level like this, right? So you get him eye to eye. You got to get him out of the street first so you don't both get run over. Okay, number one, get him out of the street. And then you make sure you get his attention. So it's eye to eye, you're at his level. I'll get back here just in case the camera isn't following me. And then you say to Johnny, you ran in the street. I've warned you about running in the street. That's so dangerous. If you run into the street and you're unlucky, a car will come along because they cannot see you, and they're going to run into you, and they're going to crush your bones. And you're going to bleed, and you may die. And then I'll lose you after all these years. I'll lose you. No more you. You don't grow up. Nothing more. That's it, Johnny. Now, All right, so I could feel that emotion of that. So if you ever have kids, you can understand, you can relate to what I'm saying, have some empathy there. You don't want to lose a child. Oh, no, no, no. So what you're doing is you're explaining to him what he did was wrong. And if you have a tear in your eye, let's suppose it's Dad saying this, he may have never seen Dad cry before. Never. But now Dad has tears in his eyes. So the kid, let's say he's 3 or 4, something like that, he may not understand what running into the street means. He may not understand what you're telling him, but he knows he did something wrong, something bad. And it's something that led you to feel very, very sad, right? And so he doesn't want to do that again. If he can figure out what he did, if he can comprehend what he did, he won't do it again, or at least he'll try not to do it. Kids are impulsive and they make mistakes. So that's what you might do with Johnny. You explain to him the consequences, including the consequences for you, which is all this hurt and loss, and the consequences for him, he never grows up. There's no more school. I mean, that's the reality of it, isn't it? Are you going to try to protect kids from the reality? Death. Death is what we're trying to prevent here. I want you to at least reach adulthood. That's my responsibility. So you explain that to him. The other thing you might do with Johnny is he doesn't play in the front yard ever until he's 18. That's another possibility. Or until he's more sensible. That's just too risky for that problem and other problems, depending on where you live. So he may play only in the backyard, which has a gate he can't get out of, or something like that, or he only plays in the front yard with you. That's a little different from my main thrust of what I want to say. Instead of using punishment, you use explanation, but you do it from the heart. And you see how direct how honest that message is? You're not hitting him. Instead of showing anger, you're showing fear and sadness. Yeah? That's the real emotion inside you, probably. If you dig down below the anger, it's this fear, sadness, anxiety, all these other negative. And now you're sharing those. You're teaching him something about emotions as well as about don't run into the street, you little numbskull. You'll get killed there. All right, so that's the sort of answer. You can do it however you want with parents. It's not likely to work for various reasons. They have religious views or their own habits or what their parents did and so on. So, but that's the best you can do. All right, let's move on to another. We've talked enough about classical conditioning, operant conditioning, including reinforcement and punishment. Let's talk about observational learning. Here we're talking about Albert Bandura, who was a genius, one of my idols for sure. Recently died, I believe. But what a career he had. He was the first one to study observational learning, sometimes called modeling. And what he found is if we see somebody do something, we're more likely to do that, whatever it is. But it depends a little bit on who we see doing it and what the outcome of doing it is. We'll get to that in a minute, but there are different types of models, people who show us, here's a way to do something. Some of them are live, so we'll tend to talk like other people. You wonder why you speak in English, if those of you grew up speaking English. It's because that's what you heard. That's what other people did. And you develop probably some of the same facial expressions, some of the same ways of saying hello and goodbye. You just copy those. Why do we copy? Boy, because that's efficient. You don't have to do anything. We don't even have to pay attention. It just sort of sinks in us. And when the situation comes up, we do. That's what we're talking about with parents, right? Johnny runs into the street. What would their parent have done? What did their parent actually do? Whack! That's what they do. Or if their parent was an explainer, the parent would sit down with the child and explain. And that I must say, can be as punishing as anything. It goes on for a while. And that heartfelt with a tear in the eye, that's probably pretty punishing for the child. It's instructive, but it's also unpleasant because the child feels responsible. I did this. I did something bad to Dad or to Mom. So you can have a live model. That's one way we learn. It's a very efficient way. It doesn't always lead us in the right direction. It's how we learn to use curse words too, and maybe violence to get our way. You can have video instruction, and that's what my BMod students are doing. When they create their video and put it up on YouTube, they're hoping it will compete well against all the billions of other videos. And then people will use it, and they'll take their advice and make some important change in themselves to get over a phobia, get over nail biting, something like that. So you can use videos, and I often use, if I'm going to treat someone for a phobia, I'll show them a video either of me or this famous psychologist treating someone for a video. I did some for TV. This famous psychologist named Ost, he did some for, it wasn't for TV, but it was for a video training of psychologists. So I might show them, here's a person who was extremely afraid and now went through the treatment we're going to give to you, which is gradual exposure treatment, and then got over the fear and the avoidance. So we'd show them about, she had a snake phobia, the one that Dr. Ost did. We would show that to people who have a different sort of animal phobia, like a spider phobia, frog phobia, something like that. So those are also models that we're setting. There's what we call a coping model, someone who's very similar and then had to struggle and get through it, but did make it at the end. And then there are stories, and your textbook probably has stories. I can't remember right now, but I know my BMod textbook has all sorts of anecdotes of doing this, applying these procedures, and here's the outcome of it. Those are stories, those are models. They're just written models. And they tell us, oh, this will work if we do it. Now, some of you have probably looked at videos. Have you ever looked up a how-to video? How to do something? How to get a broken key out of a lock? How to get some tool to work? Nobody ever did that? Yeah, well, that's what my students are doing. It's a how-to video, but it's a psychological how-to video. So those give us a lot of information. It's usually pretty fast. And it's good to see someone do it, especially if the person's explaining how to do it. That can be a very powerful model. Now, there are characteristics of a model that make it either more potent or less potent. One thing I already mentioned is it's good if the model's behavior pays off. So if you're telling someone, here's how to hit a ground stroke in tennis, you want to show someone do it right and then really smack the ball well and then show the outcome of it, that ball went with top spin and went near the baseline and went hard, it was hard and deep and so on. So you want to show the consequences of the model's behavior, and if we're talking about the phobia case, you wanted to see that woman at the end saying, yeah, I'm much better now. I can watch movies with snakes. It doesn't bother me. I can go out in the park where there might be snakes. There are trees and bush around. That's all right. So you want to show and what we call that is vicarious reinforcement. If we see somebody else doing it, yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry, I introduced that term, but that's what it is. We see somebody else doing it, and it pays off. We're more likely to do that behavior. If we see somebody do something that leads to disaster, then we're less likely to do it. Even though there's a modeling influence, we know we could do this behavior. We don't want to do that. So consciously, we wipe out that. And I sometimes get that experience when I'm doing psychotherapy. A client does something, and I think, gee, I might have done something like that, but this led to absolute disaster for you. I don't say that, but I think, remember this. Don't do anything like that. There's also the perceived status of the model. We want high status, don't we? Isn't that why celebrities are paid a lot of money to be models? It used to be for smoking. The most famous celebrities would be doing cigarette commercials, and doctors too, physicians would do cigarette. Oh man, what a great thing when I'm having a break just to relax a little. I don't do that anymore. And it's not even allowed. Those TV commercials aren't even allowed anymore because smoking is so deadly. But we want someone who's high status, which could be a physician, it could be a celebrity of some sort. That makes the model more powerful. Perceived similarity is good. And so if you're going to use a model, it'd be nice if it was about the same age as the client and about the same sex. The more similar, the better. And that sort of coping model of someone who's very afraid, that's how phobia clients come in. They're very afraid, but they're determined. So they're willing to do something here. And then they see someone else like them, and that person's very much like them, maybe the same sex, about the same age. But most importantly, that person is terrified of something that has some irrational fear, whether it's of little flying insects, moths, or being up high, has a fear of an irrational level. And so we want to have like models. In that OS video that I mentioned to you, the woman who was getting treated was very likable. She didn't actually look like a movie star. That probably helped too. But she was a very pleasant person when she wasn't terrified. She wasn't cringing about the snake being present. So you want to have certain types of models. Those are most potent. And so if you're a little child, who's potent? Your parents are potent. They're like gods to you. And then you hit 13 and it turns. They're more like the devils to you. Or the jailers. Maybe that's the better term. They seem like jailers to me. And then along the way, you're starting to turn to your peers. And you hear about peer pressure. Sometimes peers don't have to pressure you to do anything. They just do it themselves. And then you want to do it. They start using a certain expression. I remember in high school, one of my friends would say, "Ain't it?" which isn't good grammar. I just like that. I like the way he said that. And I started saying for a while, "Ain't it?" Just copying from a peer. He was someone I liked, and he was a guy like me in my same class. He didn't have high status, and I didn't see it paying off for him particularly, but I saw it, I liked it, and I did it. That's part of the danger of substance abuse and gambling and so on, depending on who you're running with. If you have good models right now as students, those are students who are trying hard, who are working hard to learn, who are goal-oriented, highly organized. That's going to rub off on you. The people you surround yourself with, or who are around you one way or another, they will have an influence on you just from what they do. Now let's talk about research. This is one of the first studies I ever did as a young scientist, and it was a very interesting one. It was based on the research of Albert Bandura. He had these Bobo dolls, and he did research that showed if you show them a model of an adult, you know what a Bobo doll is? It's an inflated thing. It's weighted at the bottom. If you hit it, it comes back up. It's a little bit like a speed bag, if you know a speed bag, which is hung up, and you hit it and it comes back. Well, this is on the ground. You hit it or you kick it, and it comes back up, so you can hit it over and over. And so he showed that if you do this in front of kids, they'll want to do it too. Or let me state this more precisely. They'll do it too. They've never done it before, never occurred to them to hit this thing. Just looking at it and playing with other toys. But when they see someone doing it, especially an adult who has some prestige, then they start doing it. That was part of what made Bandura famous, the Bobo doll studies. And we did a different study because we thought the same principle would apply to video games. And so we had some children, we randomly assigned some children to play an aggressive game, which involved smacking things, kicking things, and so on. And others played a different sort of game. There was no violence in. We then observed them in a play area, you might say, controlled by us. What did they actually do? And the kids who watched the aggressive video, who had that model, the video model of aggressive behavior, they acted more aggressively. And so I think we were the first ones to show that applies to video games, or could apply to video games for children. Since then, there have been many other studies showing about the same thing. That's just an example of the potency of video games. We copy what we see or what we experience, what we observe. Maybe that's the best term for it. Now, okay. Oh, okay, gotta put my watch right side up so I know what time it is. Let's talk about learning principles applied, how you might use them, and how they're used by psychologists. One of the things I do for students or former students is I help them, I help train them for going on to interviews, say to get into a clinical master's program or to get a job. And sometimes I do this just for people from the community also, just my psychological pro bono work, free work. And so what I always use is behavioral skills training. And this is something university might, university tries to help students get jobs. I'm not sure it does it in such a sophisticated way as I do it, but anyway, it probably does something similar to this. And so there are 4 steps in behavioral skills training. This is a big chunk of what I teach in behavior modification. First, instruction, we tell them what to do. Then we show them what to do. Then we have them practice what to do with us, usually in role playing. And then we have some feedback where first they do a self-evaluation, then we give them professional, objective evaluation after that. So it's constructive in the sense we always try to find some good elements to what they're doing in their practice. And we probably name one thing at a time to improve because people can only improve one thing at a time, whether it's tennis or job interviewing or whatever. And so I put in a link here, and I think you can get this off the slides one way or another. If you want to look at this, what I did is when I was training people quite frequently, I couldn't find a good job interview video, which is surprising to me. There are billions of videos. I mean, there's not a good a video of someone doing a good job interview. There's some that are comical showing an awful person, awful performance being interviewed. But I couldn't find, those are interesting, entertaining. I couldn't find a good one. So we made a good one, and it was with one of my marking assistants for behavior modification. And she did it well. Yeah, she did it very, very well. And so we recorded that, had that professionally recorded. And that's something you can look at for 2 reasons. One, to see how behavioral skills training is done, or some certain parts of it. Another is to see how to do a job interview, because that doesn't come naturally to everybody. So some small percentage are just natural, they just have it. Just like some people are natural athletes, some people are natural at these social interactions. And what I used with her and what was demonstrated there to some extent was the instruction, the modeling, the rehearsal, and the feedback. And one of the important elements that some people don't understand is perhaps the most useful thing for you going into an interview of any of these sorts is to know what the questions are going to be. Think about that if you knew for the final exam every question you're going to be asked in here. That would be helpful, wouldn't it? If you knew that, say, a week, 2 weeks, a month in advance, I wouldn't want to know the questions. I'll look up the answers then, or I'll think about the answers. If I can't look them up, I'll think about it. I'll have a lot of time. I won't have 2 hours. I'll have days and days to think about it. And so you may not know this, but you can find questions, typical interview questions for almost every type of specific job. And I don't know if you can find questions for admission purposes, but I know some of them. I know the likely ones, such as what makes you interested in this program? What leads you to want to become a psychologist? What makes you a good candidate? These are sort of typical generic questions. And if you don't have an answer for those, if you haven't prepared an answer for those before you go in, that's not so good. It's going to make it much, much harder for you. It's like you haven't practiced for this performance. All right, so that's the instruction, modeling, rehearsal, and then feedback is very useful, particularly if you're getting it from an expert as well as from yourself. Experts are good. If you want to learn tennis, go see a tennis pro. All right, let's talk about phobias. Boy, I really like phobias. When I was in my PhD program, all I wanted was to have a phobia class because I knew how to treat phobias. I thought I could do this, and I never got a 1. But then later, I ran the clinical master's program here. I started a phobia treatment project, and we had all sorts of them. So I wasn't treating them, but I had 20 different clients that my students were treating, and I got to watch them and advise them about how to do it. And I've done many phobia treatments myself, and somehow I started getting called by TV shows to treat people for phobias for their show. One was for Insight. If you've ever seen that show, that's a very good show. This time next year, if you've ever seen that, that's often entertaining also. So I was, and it was really quite an experience for me because TV is big time. They have money. They flew me here and there and treated me like royalty. I thought, wow, I've never been treated this well before. TV's where to be. So I have this long interest in phobias. And for you to understand the treatment of phobia, it's good to understand how they're developed. Now, I want to say before we get to learning principles, people have a genetic predisposition for all sorts of things. Some people are oriented towards becoming anxious. They're more likely to develop a phobia and other anxiety disorders too. So you have these genetic and biological predispositions for it. Well, we can't do much about those, particularly in psychology, we can't do anything about them. What we can do is apply learning principles, but apply them, we need to understand how phobias develop. So maybe somebody has a predisposition, maybe not, we'll never know about that. But what happens is 3 elements. Sometimes they're just 2 of the 3. Classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and modeling. And I will tell you about my father's phobia. Let's get up here. Here we go. My father's phobia, when he was a little boy, he was playing with 2 other boys outside of this little town where he lived. And there was a cave, a little cave, and there was a huge rock in front of it. And the other 2 boys got my dad to go inside, and then they pushed the rock in front of the entrance. And my dad couldn't get out. Think about this in classical conditioning terms. What's the unconditioned stimulus? I can wait. This is therapeutic silence. Or you might call it educational silence. What's the unconditioned stimulus there? Who's got that microphone? Whoever's speaking has to have that microphone.
The rock that's being pushed in front of the cave.
Yeah, he's trapped. Yeah, in the broader sense, he's trapped somewhere outside of town where no one can hear him scream, except the 2 boys who just pushed the rock there. So he's trapped. What's going to happen to him there? Are they going to let him out, or are they going to run off and think how funny this is? And is he going to die? The same sort of thing people think when in war or when they're being sexually assaulted. Is this it? They don't think about it as calmly as that, but that's their question. I'm going to die now. And so you have the unconditioned stimulus of being trapped there. You have the unconditioned response of what? What would your feeling be as a child? What would your emotion be?
Yeah.
Fear. It would be fear, and that's what he had. And they weren't terrible boys. It was a small town. They didn't have terrible boys. And they pushed it out. And that was all very funny. That was when he was a little boy. The rest of his life, for 60 years, he had a phobia about being in dark, enclosed spaces. So, when I was growing up, we could not go into a dark restaurant. If we went into one, we just turned around and left. My dad never went into a cinema because it's dark in a cinema. Never went into a cinema. For some reason, you could go to drive-in movies. If you know what drive-in movies, you park in your car, you could do that. You could be out at night, but he couldn't be in an enclosed space where he might not be able to get out. And in the evening, we always had to have the blinds open. I didn't quite understand the logic of that, but that's how it had to be, so you could see outside that there are other things outside, I suppose. One trial conditioning, classical conditioning, 60 years of a phobia. But that one trial probably wasn't enough by itself. There's another element that often is essential for a phobia, and that's where operant conditioning comes in. So if he went into a dark restaurant, you think, man, this is dark and it's a long way from the door. I don't know if I can get out of here. What's he going to do? Because his fear now is rising. It's going up and up and up. What will he do? Well, leave. And he walks out, and then what happens? So his fear has gone way up. He walks out the door. He's back in the fresh air. He can go wherever he wants. What happens to his fear level? What do we call that? When something bad becomes less right after your behavior. His behavior was escaping. Negative reinforcement, that's right. It's negative. There's a classic example of it. Also, if he's thinking about going somewhere like a movie, he really wants to see a movie, but then he's remembering, boy, it's very dark in there, and there are a lot of people around, the door is far off. He starts to think about it and says, no. His anxiety starts to go up, or his fear starts to go up again. Not as bad as being in there, but just thinking about it makes his fear go up. And then he decides, no, I'm not going. You kids go. The rest of the family go. There goes the fear. You see that? That's what's called escape and avoidance conditioning, all through negative reinforcement. That really strengthens the avoidance and the escape tendencies because it's so powerful. I don't know if you've ever been terrified that you're about to die. Once you survive, boy, that's a wonderful thing. You start to appreciate ordinary life then. Life is good because I've escaped that. So that's the operant conditioning. That's often combined with classical conditioning. Not always, but often. And I suspect it was for him. Now, modeling, I don't know that he had a model of fear, but I had one. My mother never learned to swim. And when I was sent to swimming classes as a little boy, I was just terrified. I was terrified of it. So I don't know, she may have given me some genes for the fear. She may have given me just set a model. I don't know how, because she never went into water. It could have just been a coincidence that she was phobic, I'm sure of that. And I was phobic, at least initially. I did go into water, and I became a scuba diver and so on. But that's a story for another day of how I did that. But it wasn't easy. And you know, if you have a phobia of some sort, it's strong. It's great fear. It's terror at certain times. So those are the principles of phobia, of how a phobia starts. Now, how do we undo them? We want to undo them. We understand learning principles. We're going to use all three of these principles for almost everybody with a phobia. Not exactly everybody, but most people with a phobia will use all three. So how do we undo, how do we create classical conditioning extinction? For Dad in the enclosed spaces, how would we use extinction? Go ahead with, thank you.
Would it be if we exposed him to it without any negative consequences?
That's what we want to do. We want to expose him to dark enclosed spaces without being trapped. Literally without being trapped there, without having to fear for his life. But the magic of it, the way I do it, the way I teach it and preach it, is we do that gradually. So it isn't so terrifying. It's still hard. It still takes courage, but we're going to do it gradually. So we might have him in a room and start to close the blind a little bit and let him stay in there for several minutes. And then raise it up again and then lower the blind a little bit. It's a little darker, a little more closed. 7 more minutes. 7 more minutes. Is he sort of getting used to this, or we might call habituating to it? He says, yeah, it's all right. Then we're going to close it a little bit more. That's the gradual exposure that prevents a person from becoming overly terrified and fleeing this whole intervention. That's the way people learn things. That's why I preach in behavior modeling, little by little. It's about the only way I can learn things or other people. Little by little. And so that's what we do with gradual exposure treatment. It's basically classical conditioning extinction. So we're going to make it darker and darker and more enclosed. Might be a smaller and smaller space, whatever it is that's important to him. But we're going to do that very gradually. That's the magic of why it works and why people stay in the treatment. And they do all the way. So that's the classical conditioning. The operant conditioning, we're going to use reinforcement because that's what we think is powerful. What are we going to do? How are we going to use reinforcement during this? He's gradually exposing himself to more and more of the feared stimulus, whether it's darkness or enclosed space or combination. How do we use operant reinforcement? How much? Okay, I'll take that one. We probably praise him. He's facing his fear. And how are we going to praise him? I would say that was brave of you. That's the ticket. That's how you're going to get over this, doing that exactly. And what I always tell my phobia clients is before we start anything, I tell them about what courage is and what a famous general said. Courage is not, when it comes to soldiers, courage doesn't mean going into combat, getting up from behind cover and attacking the enemy without fear. That would be kind of stupid to have no fear. No, courage is doing it even though you're afraid. That's what courage is. And that's what we want that client to do. Face the fear. Now here you're not worried about a bullet coming right in your face or a bomb blowing up right in front of you. You're not going to actually die, but it's like that for people who have a phobia. It's that level of fear. And we still want them, just as we want that soldier to, this is a terrible thing about war, we want that soldier to get up from behind cover and attack the enemy. And we want this client to attack that fear, to attack the stimulus in a sense, whatever it is. And so I give them that pitch at the start, and then it seems pretty sincere when I'm telling them, that was brave, that was good. You're right on the track there. That's how you're going to get over this. You see how that could be reinforcing? Because phobic people don't think of themselves as brave. You're putting the label on them. That was a brave act there. That's the way forward. All right, so that's reinforcement. How would you use modeling? And I think about this for a client I had who had, she had really a phobia about leeches. She couldn't go in her huge property because there were lots of leeches there. And she just wouldn't go out through there. How would I use modeling to get her over this fear of leeches?
Would you show other people doing the same thing? And
I could show the other people going out in the woods, yes. I decided to go a little more dramatic. I wasn't doing this for TV either, but I like drama. So I got some leeches. It's great to work at a university because they're technicians, and the technician got me leeches and gave me live leeches, and I put one on my foot to suck my blood out. Because I wanted to show her it's not like a tick. You're not going to get a disease from a leech. And it doesn't hurt particularly either. They put in stuff, so they inject stuff in you so it doesn't hurt. And then your blood coagulates. You stop bleeding. When they're done, they drop off. They're not trying to kill you. They just want to eat. That's all. So that, I saluted myself for courage on that one. Going up in a high area or dealing with a frog or something, that wasn't a big deal. But this one scared me. I had to read a lot to make sure that leeches are actually safe and that I could do this and it would be sensible. And I thought, oh, you're a brave guy, Johnny, for doing that. Now, the sad outcome was the leech was already dead. I didn't realize that. So all my courage, my bluster amounted to nothing. I don't know. No, the technician didn't know what happened to the leech either. But the client pointed out to me, John, that leech is dead after several minutes. It's not going to get any of your blood. But I did my best, and that's what you would do if the person hasn't seen this behavior done a lot before, like holding a snake, someone who holds a snake. Then you would hold the snake. You want to make sure it's safe to do that. But you would hold the snake. You would touch the frog, if it's a frog phobia. If it's going out on a safe ledge somewhere, like where there's a barrier on the Empire State Building or something, it's glass, you would go look out there first. You do it all first. You have the client do it gradually, whatever it is, and then you reinforce the person. You see, 1, 2, 3. That's how we're using all these learning principles to undo something that's been learned through 1, 2, or 3 of these methods or principles. All right, I've got to go on. Latent learning. Latent learning means learning something that's not observable. So modeling is a type of latent learning. And observational learning, and occurs without reinforcement. We didn't used to realize for a long time that it occurs. It's sort of a cognitive learning. And the idea is if you put rats in a maze, they will learn things even though there's no reward for them. They'll just sort of get a picture of how things are operating. So it requires very little effort. And that's one of the things I suggest to students is you all have a textbook. It's this thick. You're going to read thousands of words in there. One thing that almost no student does is pay attention to how it's written. You need to learn to write well if you want to keep going in education and become a professional. Well, how are you going to learn it? Why don't you learn it while you're learning about psychology or whatever else you're taking? Notice their paragraphs, their sentences, their headings in bold face. There are certain terms highlighted, how the sentences are put together, how many sentences in a paragraph. You could notice all that or not, or you could do it mindlessly. I got to get, now there's going to be no questions on the exam about that. I'm just going to suck this information into my head. Or you could use a little bit of effort and pursue some latent learning and learn something else that's very valuable to you that no one's telling you to do. All right, enough about that. I've got to stop with insight learning. Insight, I want to give you, it's where you realize something all of a sudden. And I want to give you just a couple examples of it. In 1941, there was a Swiss engineer. He liked to go for walks with his dog. And you notice they kept getting burrs in their clothes, in his clothes, and the dog would get it in its fur. And most of us would just think, and this is what I would think, being a simple-minded person, how annoying. He didn't. He looked at these burrs very closely, and what he found is there were sort of hooks, and they're hooking into his fabric. And they're hooking into the dog's fur, and he thought, I can make a product out of this. What product did he invent? Velcro, which is a combination of velvet, which is sort of a furry thing like a dog, I guess, and crochet, which means in French hook. And yeah, he invented that. He got a patent on it. He made a fortune on that. Insight. Because he was looking beyond the annoyance to what's going on in this world. How does this happen? That's insight. It takes a little bit of effort, and it takes some intelligence too. One other example I want to give you of insight learning, a fellow named Semmelweis, Austrian physician. He helped deliver women, and he realized just through observation, without trying to do any research or anything, he realized that women were more likely to die if the doctor didn't wash his hands. The nurse, the midwives who also did some, they always washed their hands. They were clean people. Their women didn't die at nearly the level that the doctors. And then if you looked at the doctors, the ones who washed their hands, their patients didn't die. And he made a big deal out of this. We need to wash our hands. And what happened? Everybody told him, you're a fool. You don't know what you're talking about. Because this was before anyone knew about germs. And then Louis Pasteur said, they're germs. They're little, other people saw this too. They're little things living in there. And Louis Pasteur said, that's what makes us sick. These are organisms in there. And then people started, the doctors who just ignored Semmelweis, they started washing their hands. And people and the women started surviving at a higher, more likely to survive. And so I say to you, yeah, you learn a lot of stuff, but look for insights. Look for something, whether it's the hook going in there or something you just observe, some connection between washing your hands, which we now know about for COVID protection, washing your hands and avoiding disease. Look for something. You might be the next one, and your insight, whatever it is, it might make you millions and millions of dollars and be so helpful for people who have arthritis who can't tie those laces. They just snap it on there. That is just great for them. Millions of dollars helping certain types of people, or you could say millions and millions of lives with your insight. I'll leave that. How's that for a challenge for you? All right, good luck to you, the rest of your study. Down here.